Do not authorize that sequence. Major Evelyn Carter's voice was calm, but it cut through the operations center with enough weight to stop Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore's hand inches above the approval console. 10 general officers turned toward her. For a moment, the only sound was the low ventilation hum moving through the windowless command room and the distant murmur of radio traffic from rows of communication stations. Evelyn stood near the rear of the conference table, a 43-year-old command and control integration specialist wearing the gold oak leaf of a major. In a room filled with stars, hers was one of the smallest ranks present. Whitmore slowly lowered his hand. "Major Carter, explain." Evelyn looked past him toward the wall-sized tactical display. Hundreds of data points moved across a digital map covering several military installations in the American Southwest. Aircraft schedules, ground coordination, relay status, and command links flowed through the network in disciplined lines of green. Nothing was flashing amber. Nothing was red. According to every diagnostic system in the room, the exercise was ready. "Western synchronization is repeating a correction," Evelyn said. Brigadier General Mark Ellison glanced toward a systems engineer. "Fault?" "No, sir. Everything is within tolerance." Whitmore looked back at Evelyn. "How large is the correction?" 0.4 of a second. Ellison's eyebrows lifted. "That is what stopped us?" Evelyn did not react to the disbelief in his voice. "Not the delay, sir. The repetition." She walked toward the display and pointed to a narrow timing column beneath the Western relay status. 3 independent data paths corrected at the same interval. Then they did it again. "Exactly." The systems engineer checked his console. "Synchronization efficiency is 99.9%. All primary and redundant links report healthy." "That is what concerns me," Evelyn said. A silence followed. One general leaned back in his chair. Another glanced at his watch. 11 months of preparation had brought them to this moment. Thousands of service members across multiple installations were waiting for authorization to begin the final command-level validation phase. Whitmore had spent more than 3 decades making decisions under pressure, and nothing on the screen supported stopping the exercise. "You are recommending a hold because the network is too synchronized?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Ellison exhaled softly. "Major, machines are supposed to synchronize." Evelyn kept her eyes on the timing data. "Independent systems are supposed to agree. They are not supposed to behave identically." Captain Ryan Brooks, seated at a communications station 20 feet away, stopped typing. He looked at the same green display everyone else was watching, then at Evelyn. She was not nervous. That bothered him. Whitmore stepped closer to her. "What do you believe will happen?" Evelyn studied the latest correction cycle. 0.4 of a second. Again. Perfectly identical. "If I am right, the network will continue reporting healthy status after the information inside it stops being trustworthy." "When?" Evelyn turned toward the digital clock above the main display. It read 14:08. Her face remained still. "Once you authorize the sequence, sir, we have approximately 18 minutes. Nobody spoke. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. 18 minutes until what? Evelyn looked from the green tactical map to the 10 generals waiting for her answer. "Until this room can no longer tell which version of the network is real." The silence lasted only a few seconds, but in a room accustomed to immediate answers, it felt much longer. Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore turned from Evelyn Carter to the wall display, where every sector still glowed green. Nothing in front of him looked like a system approaching failure. "Major Carter," he said, "you understand what you are asking me to stop?" "Yes, sir." "This validation exercise coordinates multiple installations, air operations, ground units, and communications teams. We have redundant timing sources and months of testing behind this architecture." "Yes, sir." Whitmore studied her face, perhaps expecting uncertainty to appear there. It did not. Evelyn had spent nearly 2 decades working around command networks, first as a communications officer, and later as a command and control integration specialist. She had learned that complicated systems rarely announced their most dangerous weaknesses with flashing warnings. Sometimes the smallest inconsistency mattered precisely because everyone else had been trained to ignore it. Brigadier General Mark Ellison tapped one finger against the table. Run a complete diagnostic on the Western relay. The systems engineer responded immediately. Data rolled across his monitors. Primary timing stable. Backup timing stable. Packet integrity normal. No hardware faults. No synchronization alarms. Ellison looked toward Evelyn. There is your second opinion. That is another reading from the same architecture, sir. His expression tightened. You think the diagnostics are wrong? I think they are answering a different question, which is whether the network agrees with itself. Evelyn pointed toward the timing column. I want to know whether it still agrees with reality. Captain Ryan Brooks lowered his eyes to his communications console, hiding the reaction that crossed his face. He had heard senior officers challenge technical briefings before, but Evelyn was doing something different. She was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to make them look at the problem from another direction. Whitmore walked slowly around the conference table. 10 general officers were present for the final command-level validation, each representing a major piece of the exercise. Every one of them had staff officers, technical specialists, and verified reports supporting the same conclusion. Evelyn stood almost alone on the other side. What evidence would justify stopping the sequence? Whitmore asked. Raw timing data from each independent path. How long? Several minutes. Ellison shook his head. We delay the entire exercise for several minutes because of 0.4 of a second, and if you are wrong, thousands of people wait while we prove a healthy system is healthy. Evelyn met his gaze. And if I am right, every minute makes the display more convincing while the underlying information becomes less reliable. Whitmore returned to the approval console. His hand rested beside the authorization control. Ryan watched Evelyn. She had made her case. She did not repeat it. She did not raise her voice. That restraint carried an uncomfortable certainty of its own. Whitmore looked once more at the green wall, then at the engineer. Final status? All systems ready, sir. He nodded. Proceed. The authorization entered the network at 14 hours, 8 minutes, and 27 seconds. New data began moving across the display. Green indicators refreshed from west to east. Ellison leaned back in his chair. Evelyn remained standing. Ryan glanced toward her, expecting frustration. Instead, she looked at the clock. 14 hours, 8 minutes, and 31 seconds, 4 seconds into the sequence. Then 5. Then 6. Whitmore opened his briefing folder and moved to the next phase as though the matter had been settled. Evelyn said nothing. She simply watched the seconds accumulate because somewhere inside the network, 3 independent paths had just corrected themselves again at precisely the same interval. At 14:10, the exercise looked almost insultingly normal. Aircraft coordination updates arrived on schedule. Ground units acknowledged their assigned phases. Communications traffic moved through the operations center with the steady rhythm of a system doing exactly what its designers had promised. Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore listened to a status briefing while Brigadier General Mark Ellison studied the main display with the quiet satisfaction of a man watching evidence settle an argument. Evelyn Carter stood near Captain Ryan Brooks and watched 3 narrow columns of raw timing data. Can you separate the Western paths? She asked. Ryan adjusted his console. Primary relay, secondary relay, and command integration? Yes. No diagnostic overlay. The polished graphics disappeared, replaced by raw timestamps. Ryan frowned. That is harder to read. It is also harder for the system to explain itself. He glanced at her, then back at the numbers. Another correction appeared. 0.4 of a second. A second path corrected. 0.4. Then the third. 0.4. Ryan leaned closer. Exactly the same. Again, Evelyn said. He pulled the previous cycles. The pattern repeated. Different traffic loads. Different physical routes. Different processing demands. Identical correction intervals. Ryan shook his head slowly. Could the synchronization controller be normalizing them? It could. Then why are you worried? Evelyn pointed to the timestamps. Because normalization should produce agreement at the destination. It should not erase every difference in how they get there. Across the room, Ellison noticed them working. Major Carter, have you found an actual fault? Not yet, sir. Then what have you found? 3 independent paths behaving as though they are one path. The systems engineer turned from his station. That can happen under high synchronization efficiency. Evelyn looked at him. Show me the variance before authorization. He hesitated, then pulled up the earlier data. The differences were small but visible. One path corrected slightly faster. Another drifted by a few hundredths of a second. The third varied with traffic load. Evelyn pointed at the older pattern. That is healthy. Ellison looked from the imperfect numbers to the flawless current display. You are telling me the worst-looking data is healthier? I am telling you independent systems should leave independent fingerprints. Whitmore closed his briefing folder. Major, you want me to stop a multi-installation exercise because the system is working too well? Evelyn faced him. Yes, sir. The words hung in the cold air. No one laughed, but Ryan saw 2 officers exchange glances. Whitmore stepped toward the raw display. Give me something more than pattern recognition. Evelyn studied the latest cycle. Let me isolate the Western relay for 60 seconds. And interrupt synchronization across an active validation phase? Temporarily. Ellison shook his head. For a fault no instrument has detected. Evelyn answered without heat. The instruments are inside the system we are questioning. Whitmore's expression hardened. Request denied. Continue monitoring. Yes, sir. He returned to the table. At 14 hours 11 minutes and 42 seconds, another status update arrived. All systems nominal. Ryan watched Evelyn instead of the screen. You expected him to say no. I expected him to trust the evidence he has. Then why keep pushing? Evelyn looked at the 3 identical correction lines. Because evidence can be accurate and still tell the wrong story. At 14 hours 12 minutes and 3 seconds, a new acknowledgment appeared in the raw feed. Ryan's hand stopped over the keyboard. He checked the sequence number, then checked it again. The acknowledgment had been recorded before the command associated with it completed transmission. Major. Evelyn moved beside him. Show me. Ryan enlarged the timestamps. Her pale eyes narrowed. For the first time, the problem was no longer merely too perfect. It had done something that should not have happened at all. Evelyn looked toward the clock, then toward Whitmore. For minutes had passed. The room still believed everything was green. The network had just given her the first reason to believe green no longer meant true. At 14:14, 6 minutes after authorization, nothing had failed. That fact began to carry more weight in the operations center than anything Evelyn Carter had said. The tactical display remained green from one edge to the other. Aircraft coordination continued on schedule. Ground units reported normal progress. The Western relay showed no alarms, no dropped links, and no measurable loss of performance. Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore listened as another status report ended with the same 2 words. All nominal. Brigadier General Mark Ellison glanced toward Evelyn. 6 minutes, Major. His tone was controlled, almost courteous, which made the message sharper. Evelyn stood beside Captain Ryan Brooks with her eyes on the raw timing feed. Yes, sir. At 14:17, 9 minutes had passed. Still nothing. The strange acknowledgement Ryan had found had not repeated in a way the engineers could classify as a fault. A technical specialist suggested a timestamp buffering artifact. Another blamed a temporary reporting delay. Both explanations were plausible enough to restore confidence around the conference table. Ryan lowered his voice. Maybe they are right about the timestamp. Evelyn watched another correction cycle pass. Maybe. He looked at her. You do not sound convinced. Being unconvinced is not evidence. Across the room, Whitmore. Authorize the next exercise phase. The system accepted it immediately. A sequence of green confirmations moved across the wall. Ellison folded his arms. That looks real enough. Evelyn said nothing. At 14 hours 19 minutes and 27 seconds, 11 minutes after authorization, the exercise appeared healthier than it had at the beginning. The correction interval remained perfectly stable. Network efficiency climbed by a fraction of a percent. The systems engineer announced the improvement, and several officers visibly relaxed. Whitmore turned toward Evelyn. Major Carter, unless you have new evidence, I am considering this issue closed for operational purposes. Understood, sir. Your warning will be documented in the after-action review. We will examine the anomaly and determine whether our procedures need adjustment." Ryan looked toward her. Everyone in the room understood the language. No reprimand had been issued, but her judgment was now part of the official record. If nothing happened, the exercise would remember that she had challenged a validated system in front of 10 general officers and been wrong. Evelyn's expression did not change. "Thank you, sir." Ellison seemed almost surprised. "That is all." She met his gaze. Would arguing change the data? He had no answer. Evelyn returned to Ryan's station. The room gradually moved on without her. Briefing pages turned. Radio calls continued. Chairs shifted against the floor. For several minutes, she became what she had been when she entered, the lowest-ranking officer near the table, useful enough to observe, easy enough to ignore. Ryan watched the clock approach 14:20. "You have 7 minutes left." "Approximately." "And if nothing happens?" Evelyn looked at the raw feed. "Then I was wrong, and that will be a very good outcome." The answer silenced him. She was not waiting to be proven right. She was hoping she was wrong. At 14 hours, 20 minutes, and 11 seconds, another correction appeared. 0.4 of a second. Then another. Identical. Ryan leaned closer to his headset as a faint layer of static passed beneath a routine transmission. 2 small sounds followed, so soft he almost dismissed them. Click. Click. His fingers stopped above the console. "Major. Did you hear that?" Evelyn turned toward him. "Play it back." Ryan isolated the carrier audio and replayed the transmission. Static whispered through the speaker. Then the 2 clicks came again. Click. Click. Evelyn's face changed for the first time that morning. Not fear. Recognition. The cold operations center seemed to fall away from her eyes as an older sound returned from somewhere she had not visited in years. Ryan watched her straighten slowly. "What is it?" Evelyn stared at the speaker. The green screens continued glowing behind them. "Something I hoped I would never hear again." The 2 clicks carried Evelyn Carter 13 years backward. For a moment, the Nevada Operations Center remained in front of her, but another command room rose beneath it in memory, smaller and temporary. Filled with the dry hum of portable cooling units and the faint rattle of desert wind against canvas walls. She had been 30 then, a captain assigned to a joint communications team during an overseas validation exercise. The equipment had been older, the displays smaller, but the color had been the same. Green. Every status indicator had insisted the network was healthy. Then Evelyn had heard it through her headset. Click. Click. A tiny correction pulse repeating beneath routine radio traffic. She had checked the synchronization logs and found something that made no sense. 3 separate communication paths were correcting at nearly identical intervals, while acknowledgments were beginning to arrive in an order that did not match the commands producing them. She had taken the data to Colonel James Holloway, the exercise commander. Holloway had studied the screen, then studied her. "Do you trust the display, Captain?" he had asked. Evelyn remembered looking at the perfect green indicators. "I trust the pattern, sir." Holloway had not demanded certainty. He had asked a better question. "What happens if we wait?" The network may keep reporting agreement after the timing reference becomes unreliable. Holloway had nodded once. "Then we do not wait." He ordered the affected relay isolated. Technical staff objected. Diagnostics showed no failure. The exercise schedule would be disrupted. Holloway listened, then repeated the order. Minutes later, engineers discovered a synchronization controller trapped in a correction loop, feeding repeated timing assumptions back into the network. The system had not been failing in the way people expected. It had been becoming increasingly confident in information it had stopped verifying. Nothing dramatic followed because Holloway had acted early. That lesson stayed with Evelyn longer than any commendation could have. Prevented failures rarely looked impressive afterward. They looked unnecessary. The memory released her. At 14 hours 20 minutes and 29 seconds, she was back beside Ryan Brooks. The green wall display stretched across the room. 10 general officers continued discussing the exercise as though nothing had changed. Ryan watched her carefully. "You have heard that signal before. 13 years ago." Same system. No. Same behavior. She leaned toward his console. Pull the carrier timing against relay acknowledgments. Raw data only. Ryan worked quickly. Columns appeared. Evelyn followed the sequence. One acknowledgement arrived early. Another corrected against a timestamp that had not yet propagated through the path. Then the double click sounded again. Click. Click. Ryan stared at the screen. What causes that? A synchronization process trying to reconcile information it believes should already agree. Can you prove it? Evelyn looked toward the main display. Not from inside the same network. At 14 hours 20 minutes and 56 seconds, she crossed the room toward Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore. He saw her coming and closed his briefing folder. New evidence? Yes, sir. The radio carrier is repeating the same correction signature I encountered in a previous synchronization incident. We also have acknowledgments appearing outside their expected sequence. Brigadier General Mark Ellison looked toward the engineer. Diagnostics. Still green, sir. Evelyn nodded. They were green last time too. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. You have seen this before? A similar failure mode, sir. And what stopped it? We isolated the relay before the network lost a trustworthy reference. Whitmore looked at the tactical display, then back at Evelyn. For the first time, uncertainty entered his expression. Your recommendation? Isolate the Western relay now. Freeze automatic synchronization until we establish an independent time source. Ellison shook his head. That would disrupt the entire Western sector based on a 13-year-old comparison. Evelyn's voice remained steady. No, sir. It would disrupt the exercise based on what the network is doing right now. Whitmore stared at the green status boxes for several long seconds. Then he made his decision. Request denied. Continue monitoring. Evelyn gave a single nod. Yes, sir. At 14 hours 21 minutes and 18 seconds, Ryan's headset came alive with a field report. He listened, frowned, and looked at the wall. The Western station reported it had switched to backup timing. The command display still showed primary. For the first time that morning, reality and the screen were saying two different things. At 14 hours 21 minutes and 23 seconds, Captain Ryan Brooks asked the Western station to repeat its report. The answer came back without hesitation. Backup timing active. Primary reference unavailable. Ryan looked at the wall display. Western synchronization still showed primary. Green. Stable. Healthy. Major Carter. Evelyn was already beside him. Confirm locally, she said. Have them visually verify the equipment status, not the network report. Ryan transmitted the request. Several seconds passed. Confirmed, he said. Local backup indicator is active. Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore stood from his chair. Technical staff, verify Western station. The systems engineer moved through 3 diagnostic screens. Command network still reports primary timing, sir. Brigadier General Mark Ellison stepped closer. Could the local indicator be wrong? Possible, the engineer said. Evelyn looked at Whitmore. That is no longer the important question. Ellison turned toward her. Then what is? Which source can we prove is describing reality? At 14 hours 21 minutes and 51 seconds, another field report entered Ryan's headset. A Northern Communications unit requested confirmation of an instruction that the command center showed as delivered and acknowledged 12 seconds earlier. Ryan checked the record. Sir, Northern Station. Says they just received the phase update. Whitmore looked at the display. The system shows acknowledgement at 14 hours 21 minutes and 39 seconds. They're reporting receipt at 14 hours 21 minutes and 51 seconds. The systems engineer frowned. That could be local reporting delay. Evelyn shook her head. Ask for their raw receive timestamp. Ryan did. The answer arrived. 14 hours 21 minutes and 50 seconds. The room became quieter. The wall still showed 14 hours 21 minutes and 39 seconds. 2 versions of the same event now existed, separated by 11 seconds. Whitmore looked toward Evelyn. Explain. The network is no longer only synchronizing traffic. It is beginning to synchronize its own assumptions. Meaning, if one corrupted timing reference says an event happened, The system can compare later data against that false reference and decide everything agrees. Ellison stared at the green display. So redundancy does not protect us? Not if the redundant paths inherit the same bad reference. At 14 hours 22 minutes and 37 seconds, a third unit reported its local clock drifting behind command time. The central diagnostic panel still displayed synchronization efficiency above 99%. Whitmore's face hardened. How can efficiency remain that high? Evelyn answered quietly. Because the system is measuring agreement with itself. She stepped toward the central console. Sir, isolate the Western relay. Stop automatic reference selection. Move critical confirmations to direct voice until we establish an independent clock. Whitmore looked toward the engineer. Consequences. We temporarily lose automated synchronization across several Western exercise elements. Rebuilding could take time. Ellison added, and if the major is wrong, we interrupt the validation for a recoverable reporting anomaly. Evelyn did not look at Ellison. If I am wrong, we lose time. If I am right, time is the one thing we are already losing. The digital clock changed to 14:23. 5 minutes had passed since authorization. Whitmore's gaze moved from Evelyn to the display, then to the officers around the table. For the first time, the green symbols no longer looked reassuring. They looked unproven. Hold the next phase, he ordered. The operations officer entered the command. A confirmation appeared. Almost instantly. Hold transmitted and acknowledged, sir. Ryan's headset crackled. A field controller spoke over the direct channel. Command, clarify. Are we holding or continuing? Nobody moved. Whitmore slowly turned toward the wall. The system said the order had been received. The people outside the room said it had not. Evelyn watched another correction interval tighten on Ryan's raw feed. 0.4 of a second became 0.3, then 0.2. She looked at the clock. General, she said, we are past the point where the screen gets the benefit of the doubt. At 14:24, the operations center had stopped trusting its own answers. Captain Ryan Brooks kept one ear on direct voice traffic while his eyes moved between the raw timing feed and the frozen confidence of the main display. Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore stood behind him, no longer seated at the conference table. Brigadier General Mark Ellison had stopped offering explanations. Western Station confirms hold by voice, Ryan said. Northern Station still shows the previous phase instruction locally. Whitmore looked toward the systems engineer. Can you identify which command record is authoritative? The engineer worked through the logs. Not with confidence, sir. The records are resolving against different timing references. Evelyn Carter watched the correction intervals contract. The network was no longer drifting slowly. It was working faster to force disagreement into agreement. Disable automatic reference migration, she said. Whitmore looked at her. Can we do that without isolating the relay? Not safely. Then isolate it. The engineer entered the command. Nothing happened. He tried again. Sir, the command console shows the request accepted, but the relay state has not changed. Evelyn's eyes moved to the clock. 14 hours 24 minutes and 39 seconds. Use local control. That requires confirmation from the Western site. Then call them directly. Ryan opened the channel. While he waited, something from Evelyn's earlier words stayed with him. 13 years. Similar failure. Colonel James Holloway. Ryan turned to an internal records terminal and entered her name. The first results were ordinary. Assignment histories. Then an archived technical report appeared. He opened it. The language was dry, but the conclusion was not. During a joint communications exercise 13 years earlier, Captain Evelyn Carter had identified a repeating synchronization anomaly before automated diagnostics recognized the fault. Manual isolation of the affected relay prevented the false timing reference from spreading through the wider command network. Ryan printed the first page and carried it to Whitmore. Sir. Whitmore read the highlighted lines. His eyes lifted toward Evelyn. Major Carter. She turned. You identified this failure pattern before. A related pattern, sir. And the diagnostic system stayed green? Until they could no longer reconcile the timing. Whitmore looked down at the report again. Why did you not lead with this? Because an old incident is not proof of a new one. Ellison stared at her for a moment. You were protecting the decision process even while we were questioning your judgment. Evelyn answered simply. The data had to earn the conclusion, sir. Ryan's headset came alive. Western site confirms local isolation available. Evelyn stepped beside him. Tell them to isolate on my mark. Whitmore looked at the clock. 14 hours, 25 minutes, and 11 seconds. Do it. Ryan transmitted the instruction. The Western team began its local procedure, but the main display continued showing the relay as fully connected. Then another station reported a 23-second difference between its local sequence and command time. A green status box flickered amber, returned to green, then displayed a timestamp that belonged to nearly half a minute earlier. The room went completely still. Whitmore finally understood what Evelyn had been trying to tell them. The screen was not failing to show information. It was showing information that had already lost its relationship with the present. At 14 hours, 25 minutes, and 28 seconds, Ryan heard the double click again. Click. Click. The correction interval dropped below 0.2 of a second. Evelyn moved toward the central console. When the master reference drops, do not allow automatic backup selection. The engineer looked at her. The system is designed to select the healthiest source. It cannot identify the healthiest source if they are all inheriting the same false timing. Whitmore turned to every officer in the room. No automated command decisions without direct confirmation. 10 generals who had entered the morning expecting to evaluate an exercise were now waiting for a major to explain what their own system would do next. The clock changed to 14 hours, 25 minutes, and 41 seconds. 46 seconds remained from the moment Whitmore had authorized the sequence. Ryan watched the raw feed collapse toward perfect agreement. 30 seconds. A second status box froze. 20. Radio calls began arriving faster. 10. Evelyn did not move. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. At 14 hours 26 minutes and 27 seconds, exactly 18 minutes after authorization, the master timing reference disappeared from the display. The green tactical map stopped updating. Whitmore turned away from the screen. Ellison followed. Then the others. One by one, all 10 generals looked at Evelyn Carter. For one long second, nobody spoke. The frozen tactical map still covered the wall, its green symbols suspended over information that could no longer be trusted. Direct voice traffic continued through Captain Ryan Brooks's headset, each field station asking for confirmation from a command center that had lost confidence in its own clock. Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore looked at Evelyn Carter, and the authority in his face had changed. It was no longer the authority of a commander defending a decision. It was the authority of a commander prepared to correct one. Major Carter, he said, I was wrong. We need your help. Evelyn did not smile. She did not glance toward Brigadier General Mark Ellison or anyone else who had questioned her. Her eyes remained on Whitmore. Then I need one chain of command, sir. Whitmore understood immediately. You have it. Do I have operational authority over network recovery? You have the room. Evelyn turned toward the consoles. Captain Brooks, direct voice only. Establish an independent time reference outside the affected synchronization chain. Every critical station confirms verbally before we accept its status. Yes, ma'am. Ryan began transmitting. Evelyn looked toward the systems engineer. Keep automatic backup selection disabled. The Western relay stays isolated. Do not reconnect anything because the software labels it healthy. Understood. Preserve the raw timestamps exactly as received. No normalization. The engineer nodded and moved quickly through his controls. Ellison stepped closer. His voice had lost every trace of skepticism. What do you need from us? Evelyn looked at the 10 generals. One voice. No separate corrections from individual commands. If every headquarters tries to fix its own picture, we create 10 versions of the truth. Whitmore turned to the room. All recovery decisions route through Major Carter until synchronization is restored. No one objected. At 14 hours 27 minutes and 6 seconds, Ryan received the first verified field time. Western Station confirmed against independent reference. Market trusted, Evelyn said. Do not propagate it yet. Another voice arrived. Northern Station. Then a ground coordination node. Each report was checked against the independent reference before Evelyn allowed it into the recovery picture. The wall display looked worse now. Several sectors were gray. 2 remained amber. Only a handful were green. Yet for the first time in nearly 18 minutes, everyone knew what those colors actually meant. At 14 hours, 28 minutes, and 14 seconds, the systems engineer looked up. The repeating correction process has stopped. Keep the relay isolated. Yes, ma'am. Ryan watched Evelyn work. There was no rush in her movements. Every instruction was short. Every confirmation had a purpose. She was not fighting the system. She was stripping away everything it could no longer prove. Ellison studied the raw timing feed. How did you know 18 minutes? I did not know exactly, Evelyn said. I tracked the rate at which the correction intervals were collapsing. 18 minutes was the outer estimate before the reference became unreliable. Whitmore absorbed the answer in silence. She had not made a dramatic prediction. She had calculated a shrinking margin and given them the clearest warning she could. At 14 hours, 29 minutes, and 2 seconds, another station was verified. Then another. The noise in the room began to thin. Whitmore stepped beside Evelyn. What comes next? She watched 2 independent clocks hold agreement through a full cycle. We rebuild from information we can prove. And when do we trust the network again? Evelyn waited as the next timing cycle appeared. This one was not perfect. A few hundredths of a second separated the paths. She gave the smallest nod. When it stops trying to look perfect. By 1434, the operations center no longer looked impressive. It looked honest. Several sectors on the wall display remained gray. Others held amber while Captain Ryan Brooks verified each station against the independent time reference. The flawless field of green was gone, replaced by small variations in latency and timing that would have seemed untidy 20 minutes earlier. Evelyn Carter watched those imperfections with quiet approval. Western Station verified through 5 cycles, Ryan said. Northern Station verified through 5. Ground coordination verified through 4. Give ground coordination one more cycle, Evelyn replied. The systems engineer turned from his console. Secondary reference has been reset and isolated from the corrupted timing chain. No repeating correction pattern detected. Evelyn nodded. Compare it against the independent source before reconnecting the Western relay. Already running. Brigadier General Mark Ellison stood several feet behind her, watching the timing values drift by hundredths of a second. They're not matching perfectly. They should not, Evelyn said. Different paths carry different loads. Small variation means they are behaving independently again. Ellison looked at the screen that had fooled him less than half an hour earlier. So this is what healthy looks like. Evelyn gave a small nod. Imperfect, but real. At 1436, Ryan raised one hand. 5 verified cycles across all critical stations. The systems engineer confirmed the same result from his side. Evelyn looked toward Lieutenant General Thomas Whitmore. Sir, I recommend restoring the Western relay in monitoring mode only. No automatic authority until it completes 5 independent verification cycles. Whitmore did not ask the room for another opinion. Approved. The relay returned slowly. Data began moving. 1 cycle passed. Then another. No false acknowledgments appeared. No identical correction intervals returned. By the 5th cycle, the Western sector had stabilized. Whitmore looked around the room. The exercise will not resume today. Nobody objected. We will preserve every log, every direct voice report, and every decision made from the moment Major Carter raised her warning. He paused. The after-action review will examine not only the synchronization failure, but why 10 senior officers accepted one shared display as independent confirmation. Ellison lowered his eyes briefly. Whitmore turned toward Evelyn. Major, I owe you an apology. She faced him. Sir, an apology will not fix the process. The room became silent again. Whitmore nodded. Then tell me what will. Evelyn looked toward the wall, where the timing lines now moved with small, natural differences. Do not build a command room where 10 people looking at the same screen counts as 10 independent judgments. Give technical warnings a path outside the system being questioned. And when an experienced officer identifies a pattern the diagnostics cannot explain, test the pattern before you dismiss the officer. Whitmore absorbed every word. That will be in the review. Then that is enough, sir. There was no applause. Evelyn did not need it. No new insignia appeared on her uniform. No announcement transformed her into someone more important than she had been that morning. Captain Ryan Brooks removed his headset and looked toward the clock. The same 10 generals who had once waited for Evelyn to stop interrupting now remained still as she returned to her station. Whitmore watched her go, then looked once more at the imperfect green display. The lesson had cost them time, pride, and a day of training, but it had given them something the original system never could, a reason to question certainty. In the quiet hum of the operations center, rank had returned to its proper place. It could organize people, authorize decisions, and command a room. But experience had done something rank alone could not. It had recognized the truth before the truth became obvious.